that you'll take a step and be a presenter so that you can share your knowledge with the community.
Hey Derek, can you hear
and so
me?
the first award.
If you want to, you can get a couple of shots of me sitting here like going over my speech.
The person, the recipient, does not have to stand. I would ask that you come and join us on stage to receive your award, and then you can go back to your seat and make your friends jealous that you got a nice award. Or take a picture and put it on LinkedIn. What about that? All right. So this year's award goes to Jackie Moran. Jackie Moran is the Director of Compliance for Student Affairs at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, and also serves as the Title IX Coordinator and ADA Coordinator for students. As a Title IX Coordinator, Jackie oversees the investigation of all reports of sexual violence, stalking, relationship violence involving Rutgers students, and regularly provides Rutgers Bus Purple. I wonder if she did that by magic. I don't know how she did that. In support of ending sexual violence, Jackie works tirelessly to educate and support all students and truly make a difference in the campus community. You can also find Jackie presenting at conferences and offering advice and lessons learned to Title IX coordinators within the state and across the country. Jackie has students, faculty, and staff through the development of initiatives and interactive programs to keep the Rowan community informed of current health trends. Students are encouraged to take an active part in their own personal health as well as the health of the campus as a whole. Working in collaboration with other student life and academic departments on the Rowan campus allows for a multifaceted approach to prevention and health promotion. Programs under ACI include Are You a Lifesaver Suicide Prevention Program, Green Dot Bystander Intervention, Alcohol-Wise, Consent and Respect Drug and Alcohol Education Program, Sexual Health Ed on Title IX and orientation each year to students. She is one of those presenters imparting information to thousands of students across the years. Since its inception, HCI has held a seat on the Sexual Violence Prevention Committee, which has been in existence now for 9 years. Allie Pierce serves as a co-chair over the committee, which includes representation from multiple departments and community partners, is dedicated to creating a safer climate. Allie Pierce and HCI. And Brittany Dodge is with her as well. So let's give them a round. The benefits of Title IX may not apply equally to all students in practice. This workshop discusses how the history of Title IX raises questions about its applicability for all sexual violence and explores strategies for addressing sexual violence in LGBTQ+ communities. How effectively does Title IX address same-sex violence? What other policy and programmatic options exist? And how can we improve support for LGBTQ+ students? Ethan and Molly have revamped this program in response to the new state of Title IX and are repeating the workshop by popular demand. All right, and so thank you all very much for your attention, and please enjoy the rest of the summit.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Amy Hoke. I am the Associate Director of Counseling and Psych Services here at Rowan University, and I also co-chair the Sexual Violence Prevention Committee with Allie Pierce, who's just on there.
Raise the lights just a little.
So I'm here to actually introduce our invitee, independent political analyst, Rochelle Ritchie, as the keynote speaker for this afternoon. Rochelle Ritchie is commonly featured on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News Channel, Fox Business Network, I-24 News, and Russian television. With more than a decade of television news experience, Rochelle has served as the spokesperson and Director of Communications for the Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City, where she was the direct media liaison during the Freddie Gray police brutality case. The death of Freddie Gray led to several days of rioting in the city. Rochelle's passion for politics and justice continued on Capitol Hill, where she worked as the press secretary for the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee of the House of Representatives. Rochelle's proven skills as a journalist and analyst secretaries and communication directors for House Democrats and to assist in the drafting of the Democratic's economic message, A Better Deal. Rochelle is a published writer who has multiple features in The Root, The Hill, and Newsday. In 2018, Rochelle discussed a deeply tragic and personal story of sexual violence when she was a 19-year-old college student. On Fox News, for the first time, she bravely shared with millions her personal battle with overcoming a sexual assault. In her op-ed, Sexual Assault is Not a Game, Stop Using Women to Score Political Points, Rochelle passionately writes about the politicization of sexual violence and the unfortunate use of sexual assault survivors and victims as political pawns. As a psychologist who works with survivors of sexual assault, I know the courage it takes to share one's story. Each story is unique and deeply moving, and it reminds us of why we do the work we do. Rochelle is here with us today to share her story and her passion for the fight against sexual violence. Please help me in giving her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Amy, for that introduction. It's always kind of weird to sit there and listen to someone talk about you. But I'm here to tell you a story, my story. It's fall, October 2011, just a few weeks before my college homecoming. I'm on my way back to my dorm when I realize that my gas tank is on E. So I pull over to put gas in my 1996 black Honda Accord. It was my favorite car. When he pulls up behind me, I was not startled or alarmed because I knew this person. I had known him for the last 2 years. So why would I ever assume that I was in any sort of danger when he asked me how was I doing and told me that he had just bought a new puppy and I should stop by and play with her? So I agreed, and I followed him to his apartment just about 10 minutes down the road. I had absolutely no idea the terror that awaited me inside and would impact me for the rest of my life. Conversations about school and our major and future professional goals and all of those things you talk about as college students turned into unwanted touching. To him saying, just stay a little while longer, and me forcefully telling him, no, I'm ready to go. To get off of me, to stop, to pushing, to shoving, to ultimately rape. As I lay there on the floor near the front door, where I actually had tried to escape, my jeans were ripped, my gray Chicago hoodie was halfway up my chest, and I could hear him saying, I'm sorry, hey, are you okay? I'm sorry. I did not cry. I was numb. It felt as though my soul was no longer attached to my body, and I was a zombie. I got up, I pulled my sweatshirt down, grabbed my purse and keys, and I left. I felt absolutely disgusting. I felt gross, empty. And as I drove back to my dorm, the act replayed in my head repeatedly. Every time I thought about the forced penetration, I wanted to vomit. How could this happen to me? What just happened to me? This was not a stranger. This was not someone, he was actually a student. So I knew him. But I didn't know, who do I tell? I couldn't recall any conversations at my university about rape or sexual assault. I couldn't even recall those conversations with my parents, my friends, or any educational institution I had ever attended. All I ever heard as a young girl growing up in the 80s and 90s was don't do drugs, don't get pregnant. But no one mentioned what to do if you're raped. I parked my car outside the dorm, walked into the building, and began clutching my jeans closed because they were ripped open. But my roommate was asleep. I took off my clothes, threw them down the trash chute, not realizing I'm in a 19-year-old mindset that I'm actually throwing away evidence. I went into the communal shower where I attempted to scrub away the violation that had happened to me. And while I could clean my body, I could not scrub away the memory of the long-term impacts that would follow me my entire life with all of my intimate relationships with men. I fell into a deep depression. I stopped eating. I slept most of the day, and I cried alone. Alone. I contemplated saying something, but I was terrified that if I told people what happened to me, that other students would talk bad about me, label me promiscuous, a slut, and that I might even lose some of my close friends because, again, I knew him, they knew him, and we were all close. So I, like many others, stayed silent and internally tortured myself with guilt for months. I failed that semester of college. What happened to me, and to give me a sympathy pass. After months of suppressing my assault, I had conditioned myself to operate in a robotic state. My professor was clearly uncomfortable. He shifted in his chair, cleared his throat, a sign of nervousness and uncertainty of what to say. And he could only muster up a typical response. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Is there anything you need me to do?" I didn't know what he should do. Wasn't it his job and the job of the university to tell him what to do? So I said, no. It was not until winter break that my parents found out about my rape. After seeing my grades, my mother was outraged. When I angrily told my parents what happened to me, my mother took me to the police station immediately. On the way, I remember my mother weeping, not crying, weeping hysterically. She was crying the tears that I had privately cried for months. My mother thought that by taking me to the police station, I would somehow get some justice. That's not what happened. When we arrived, I shared my story with the officers, and they asked me the dreaded question that all sexual assault survivors are asked at some point about their experience. Why didn't you say anything sooner? And told me that I needed to contact the campus police that was 2.5 hours away because it was out of their jurisdiction and there was nothing they could do. That victim-blaming question and the lack of guidance from the police department was enough for me to think that I had made the right decision to stay silent. I remember looking at the male and female officer and answering them with this: I didn't say anything because you guys wouldn't have done anything anyway. I got up and I walked out. My mother followed behind me, very confused and upset. But I had already accepted that my body, my trauma, did not matter. As an African American woman, the nonchalant response and inaction from the police officers and my favorite professor was not a great shock, because while more than 20% of African American women are likely to experience sexual violence in their lifetime, more than any other demographic of women in this country, historically speaking, a Black woman's body has never been her own. Stories of people like Reese Taylor, an African American woman from Alabama who in 1944 was kidnapped after leaving church, brutally gang raped by 6 white men. Her story highlights the disregard of Black women as also needing just as much legislative protection as white women. Even when the men confessed, 2 grand juries declined to indict the men and no charges were ever brought. In 2011, the Alabama legislator, this is good, actually apologized on behalf of the state for their failure to prosecute Ms. Taylor's rapist. How ironic is that? Because now that same state, in 2019, just 8 years later, has signed a bill that forces a woman or even a young girl who is able to conceive to give birth to a child, even if that child was conceived in rape or incest. While she is best known for refusing to give up her seat on the bus, Rosa Parks, who was instrumental in fighting against the acceptable brutalization of Black women in the Jim Crow South, also dealt with sexual assault. Years before her courageous act in Montgomery, Rosa Parks worked as a housekeeper under a man who could not keep his hands to himself. In a 6-page essay, she writes, "He offered me a drink." Did I go? Let's go back. There we go. "He offered me a drink of whiskey, which I promptly and vehemently refused. He moved nearer to me and put his hand on my waist. I was very frightened by now. He liked me. He didn't want me to be lonely, and I would be sweet to him. He had money to give me for accepting his attention," she wrote. "I was ready to die, but give my consent? Never, never." Just as those officers looked at me with judgmental eyes and spoke, not only when I see over-sexualized music videos saturated with degrading depictions and words used about women, or the boasting of politicians who believe their fame affords them physical access to any woman they choose. But I am also reminded of this truth by our history. Perhaps the disregard for a Black woman's body began when she was used as a breeding tool for slave masters who needed more slaves. Perhaps it spread across the globe to Europe, where Sarah Baartman, a South African woman who in 1810 signed a contract saying she would participate in shows in England and France. These were freak shows, a sexual pageantry that allowed the English and French to gawk and stare at her large buttocks and even touch it if they paid more money. Black women have been consistently hypersexualized, underrepresented, and ignored in discussions surrounding the historic impact of sexual violence, which has continued racialized sexual discrimination in our country and on our college campuses. A study by Roxanne Donovan at the University of Michigan found that college students perceived a Black victim of sexual assault to be less believable than a white victim. Look at me. What makes my story less important, less believable than any other woman in this room? Perhaps this is why Black women are also less likely to report their rape and why they are less likely to see their attacker penalized if they press charges. Another study by researchers at Pepperdine University discovered that men who are found guilty of raping Black women receive shorter jail sentences than if found guilty of raping white women. Despite the many triumphs in equality and civil rights, racialized sexual discrimination continues to be a pervasive issue that has survived for centuries. Now, whether a woman is Black, white, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, or Indigenous, there is an unfortunate common thread that sews all of us together, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, and religion: our silence that is buried in shame and blame. According to the Department of Justice, 80% of sexual assaults go unreported. But why? Well, 20%, as you can see, fear retaliation from their rapist or society. 13% think the police would not help. That's what happened to me. And 8% did not think the sexual assault was important enough to report. On college campuses alone, the number of sexual assaults that go unreported is a shocking 95%. 95%. There are troubling cases in which evidence collected from rape victims has been left to sit for months and even years to the point that they collect mold. How many times have we all heard stories of rape kits going untested and perpetrators being left to walk the street? From the east to the west, women have had to file lawsuits in order to pressure law enforcement officials and even institutions of higher education to take their claims seriously. Victim blaming has deadly consequences. In 2007, Sharice Morales was raped by her 54-year-old teacher, Stacey Rambold. He was only sentenced to 30 days in prison, even though he admitted to raping his student. In addition to the disgusting act committed by Rambold, the judge's response during the sentencing was just as violent. He said that she, Sharice, was as much in control of the situation as the defendant. She was in much control of the situation as the defendant. 3 years later, Sharice committed suicide as a result of her rape and the harsh remarks by the judge. Dr. Beverly Engel, a psychotherapist, says that sexual assault victims are ashamed to come forward and may even blame themselves because in our society, blaming rape victims is the norm. We ask, why did you wear that short skirt? Why did you walk home late at night alone? Why did you go to the party by yourself? Why were you drinking at 18, 19 years old? These accusatory questions perpetuate rape culture not only on college campuses, but across our country. The movies and the media will have you think that the miniskirt, the late night walk home, and the pervert with a knife waiting in the alley for his next rape victim, or the drunk sorority girl at a frat party are the only acceptable conditions that allow room in our minds to believe that a rape did or possibly occur. But in my case, and in the case of 85 to 90% of female college students, their rape is committed by someone they know, trust, and maybe have dated. For too long, many colleges have simply complied with Title IX training in order to receive federal funds from the government. But too often, their compliance has left student rape victims physically, mentally, and emotionally bankrupt in order to protect the school's image and reputation. I understand the negative impact of not being provided the necessary counseling or support from your university. I understand what it feels like to go to those who are sworn to protect citizens in their community, look at you, and in a speculative tone ask you more questions about why you didn't come forward and less questions about the person that actually raped you. And nor do they even offer to give you any help to navigate your way to justice. They just tell you, we can't help you. Have a good day. That is not the college experience any student who has been sexually violated should have or deserve. And it's certainly not a practice that we should be fostering or promoting. Because as Sharice has unfortunately shown, rape can cost lives even several years later. As the normalization of sexual misconduct to Title IX have weakened its protections of students who experience sexual harassment or violence on campus and has completely eliminated any protections for transgender students who, according to the Association of American Universities, 19% of transgender college students experience sexual assault. Under the new rules, a student accused of sexual misconduct would actually have the right to cross-examine their accuser in a live hearing. This rule alone is sure to violate Title IX in itself. Think about it, because it does not ensure that the students who report sexual harassment or assault are able to continue their education in a safe and unbiased environment. How can a student possibly feel safe or comfortable having to disclose in a live hearing their sexual history or even their alleged assault for all to see? The Title IX revisions brought a sigh of relief to some colleges whose responsibility will be reduced and leave less risk for the school. But is relief from protecting students appropriate? Should those who are entrusted with educating the next generation of lawyers and journalists not also be concerned about protecting them from sexual violence? Should faculty members not also be armed with the tools and resources needed to ensure that their students are safe and immediately have the help they need should they unfortunately become 3 out of the 4 college students that the Department of Justice says will be raped before they graduate? 3 out of 4 before they graduate. Yes, it would be easy to forget about the silent sufferers when only 5% come forward and report sexual misconduct. But that does not negate the fact that they and their rapists are real. And when we quietly gloat about the lessened responsibility because of new policies and revisions, we fail to realize that the rapists on our college campuses becomes a future problem for the rest of the world. How many lives might have been changed or saved if it had been more important to protect students and not reputations as a whole? And how many more men, women could have been saved? But if we are to improve how we discuss sexual misconduct and violence and how we protect students from sexual harassment on college campuses, then we must be impartial. Now, some of you might feel that I have some bias against the new revisions. I do. Because I am a sexual assault survivor, but I am also fair. The revisions to Title IX are also said to be an effort to ensure an objective process for the accused and allow them, just as they would in the court of law, to be presumed innocent until found guilty. When I hear stories of students who have been blamed for sexual misconduct or violence, being expelled from school prior to being found innocent, it is deeply disturbing. And it does anger me that someone would ruin someone's life by lying about something that is so traumatic and life-changing. While the statistics of unreported sexual assault crimes on college campuses is high, 95%, as I showed you earlier, false reports range from 2 to 10%. Not as dramatic of a number, but still with very dramatic consequences. One story in particular, and I won't name the school, but one story in particular that troubled me involved 2 college football players who were accused of raping a woman who was in fear of losing her boyfriend after she had sex with the 2 athletes. These young men withdrew from school, although they had not been arrested or found guilty. One lost his football scholarship. The female student who lied was rightfully sentenced to a year in jail after the innocent men shared the trauma they have had to endure. And all that had been lost as a result of someone desensitizing and disrespecting the impact of sexual assault to their own benefit. While college campuses are their own individual institutions with rules and policies that are solely theirs, we cannot ignore the outside influence our politics has also had on the unapologetic and indifferent attitude towards sexual misconduct, harassment, and violence. During the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, for the first time, I felt compelled to speak out publicly about my own sexual assault experience. I had never done that before. Just in the instances of people making false reports of sexual assault, I saw this same manipulation of sexual violence used in our politics, which unfortunately does a disservice to activism such as the Me Too movement or the fight to build consent cultures across college campuses. Just as I believe that politicians who received notice at Dr. Christine Blasey Ford about her allegations of sexual assault at the hands of now Justice Brett Kavanaugh had a moral duty to immediately inform law enforcement officials, so do college faculty and staff and all of us in this room if an alleged victim confides in us, regardless of Title IX policies. Instead, Dr. Ford's story was withheld for several weeks, only to later be used as a legislative pawn for political revenge and not justice. Right now, the highest office in our nation is occupied by a man who has admitted to grabbing women by their genitals and is accused of sexually assaulting more than a dozen. Again, I said accused. And has also, without hesitation, defended senators who have been accused of pedophilia. My statements are not to condemn any member in political office, but it's the truth. I want to shed light on the influence that such leadership, behavior, and locker room talk has had on the changes to and obligation of Title IX and the insensitive approach to sexual harassment and violence in our community. Perhaps our difficulty in finding ways to end rape culture is because as a society, we don't understand what it is. But before we go down that road, here are a few quotes that might help you understand why rape culture is so problematic. These are actual quotes. Bad weather is like rape. It's inevitable. You might as well relax and enjoy it. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to shut the whole thing down. These are politicians, people. Instead of thinking of rape as a speculative, violent crime, and some rapes are, think about it as non-consensual. That is bad sex. Sex where there is no communication, no tenderness, no mention of love. Well, I'm going too fast. Okay, here we go. Here's another quote. We also need to talk about the power that women have to control the situation. I'm from the old school where you can't appear to have behaviors that appear to be inviting. When you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by and y'all know the rest. All of those statements were said publicly by politicians and even scholars, those who have a powerful voice and have unfortunately misused it to trivialize rape and survivors of rape. While these statements are triggering, it is not enough to be angry. Instead, there must be a strategic plan that uses such moments as educational opportunities. I'm reminded of a quote that went viral from activist filmmaker Jackson. Schools were harassed last year, but not about how many boys harassed girls. The reason why this quote is so profound is because it highlights that how we talk about rape and sexual violence tends to relieve the perpetrators of that violence of any responsibility and puts ownership back on the victim. In the words of Anita Hill, women who accuse men, particularly powerful men, of harassment are often confronted with the reality of the men's sense that they are more important than women as a group. While we have a moral duty to change how we address issues of sexual misconduct and harassment, and while women are consistently at the front lines fighting for equality and protection, I believe men are just as, if not even more important, of a resource in changing rape culture in our nation and educational institutions. After all, Title IX was co-authored by a man and a woman. All students must have a safe place to share and report inappropriate sexual behavior or assault, and be reminded that it is never okay, whether they are black, white, gay, straight, transgender, LGBTQ plus whatever. Regardless of who a student tells, everyone should be armed with the tools needed to get immediate help, because All students matter. Those survivors may stay silent. The act against them in no way, shape, or form is acceptable, even though they may be black. They are no less deserving of their accusations being taken seriously. Even though they may be gay or transgender, they are no less deserving of equal protections. And even though they may be the accused, they too are no less deserving of an unbiased investigative process. But perhaps it is possible that our focus is misplaced and poorly directed towards ending rape culture. Maybe the solution is not to focus so much on what we want to end, but what we want to begin, a culture of consent. But the challenge we face in protecting the accused and the accusers at the same time is daunting. So where do we start? We first must eliminate victim blaming that indirectly, or in some cases directly, puts the blame on the accuser. Second, in our discussion with students, faculty, and staff, while we aggressively drive home the point of no means no, we must be just as assertive in educating people on what it means to operate in a culture of consent, but not just what it means, what it looks like. And third, colleges must provide a consistent message and opportunity to educate all who are associated with their campus, and even parents. Parents are oftentimes neglected. My mom had no idea what to do. And we must do this not just in April during Sexual Assault Awareness Month, but every day. Each of you today has a voice that can be used to create a culture of consent. I decided to use my voice and my story and my triumph as a way to encourage a genuine discussion around sexual assault that is not used for a game of political charades, but instead education and justice. We must firmly address what we tell young people and ourselves about sexual misconduct. We have to talk about it sooner with children. We can't do it when they're freshmen in college. We have to start talking about it sooner. And we have to do some self-evaluation on how we as individuals truly characterize it. What do we really say in private? Because it's our hidden biases that ultimately influence how we treat survivors and discuss the issues. And though policies may change, our human decency should not. The words that we use to speak to and about each other and the words that we use to teach all have the power to influence change. Words are free, but it is how we use them that may cost us. Words have the energy and power to help, heal, and hinder, but also to hurt, harm, and humiliate. What will your words be? How will you use your voice to influence? And starting today, how will you decide to be part of the change? Thank you. Oh, thank you.
I have a little something for you later.
Okay.
Before you leave.
Okay.
Thank you, Rochelle, for
Thank you.
sharing your story with us. When we were searching for a keynote speaker, we were very drawn to Rochelle. Let's put our hands together again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tomorrow we have another fully packed day of several workshops that I'm sure you're going to find will resonate with you. I know many of you have different us as administrators and so forth, some idea of what they themselves are looking for. Because let's be reminded that Title IX is all about protecting our students. And so we would like to begin the day that way. And we will end our day with a plenary discussion that will be moderated by my bestie right here, Rashida Douglas, out of Rutgers.